I'm Dr. Evonne, your host and founder of Elise, author of Can You Sleep Like This and the Rest of God and Reflections on Rest. Do you tell the truth in your relationships, or are you afraid to tell the truth? Are you nervous that if people knew how you really felt about them or the relationship, your circumstances, life in general, or even just things personally, that they would mistreat you or treat you differently? A lot of times in relationships, we're not always honest with how we feel or what's going on. And then sometimes our relationships suffer because we can come across pretentious or not necessarily honest or transparent in how we deal with others that are either close to us, maybe at work, or even associates that we interact with. Today, we're digging further into emotional intelligence as it relates to relationship management. I'm excited to have with us Elizabeth Leffall. She is an entrepreneur, founder of Fueled by Faith Enterprises, a consultant, a mentor, and also co-author of a Business Women's Bible Study. Let's tune in as we talk more about relationship management and truth. I'm so glad to have you here with us today, Elizabeth.
Hi, it's so good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Awesome. I've been talking about emotional intelligence for a little while now, and one of the key components is relationship management. One of the key things that I see around relationship management is the lack of truthfulness that we often have in our relationships. Most often, people want to feel as if everything's okay. When they see things happening that might be going wrong, we might have a tendency not to talk about it, and so we'll try to cover it up. As a consultant and entrepreneur, what's your thoughts on this?
I definitely see that every single day, whether it's in consulting, just working with people, no matter the type of relationship, the truth is not in us. It's something that doesn't naturally come from us. We have to work at it. We have to work to be truthful. For one of the obvious reasons is that we're concerned about the response we're going to get. We're concerned about the loss or the lack of benefit that we're going to get from whatever happens from because we're truthful. Whether it's a manager being truthful to a staff member, whether it's a friend being truthful to another friend about something that they see, it's just not a comfortable place. And so we prefer the lie. And
When
that's
you
why we
say
don't get we don't get that honesty that we really desire.
when you say we're not comfortable with the truth, I think about that, and it's like we want people to tell us the truth. Like we want people to share with us, most often, the truth about different situations. But at the same time, when you say we're not comfortable with that, tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. Most times, unless you're in a frame of mind to receive it or you are just purely open to suggestion and correction, most people are not comfortable with hearing something unless they're ready to make a change in that area. So it's very uncomfortable to hear that maybe you worked hard on something, you missed something. If you are a people pleaser, you're trying to please that person, so you don't want to hear that something's incorrect. Or we have a tendency to take correction and take it very selfishly instead of actually looking at the feedback that we're receiving. I know I'm guilty of doing that. I know others that I've shared feedback to were guilty of that as well. A lot of times we personalize feedback that we get instead of actually just addressing that behavior or that action. And now it's a personal issue and it makes it really hard to move forward.
Well, when you say personalize, when I think about the work environment, using that example, that we have to perform, and even in performing, the only way that we can get better is if we know the areas that we need to work on. And but then a lot of times I've seen it as a consultant, as a leader and a director, in working with clients and also working on teams, that a lot of times when people have to give feedback, even if a person is not doing well or not performing well on a project, a client project, that the feedback is not always honest. It will be couched in ways that a person's feelings would not be hurt, or they just pass that person over or look that person over and move on to the next person who they would want to get promoted, and just deem that person as not usable or valuable to the team, and instead of just sharing the truth with them. And I
Yes.
think that that's two parts, though. When you say we personalize it, like the fear of someone not taking it well, to me, is not really a rationalization for not actually speaking the truth.
I would agree with that, but I would also say being in that I would think of my career path. I've had both managers who did very well with giving feedback and others who did not. For example, someone who was fearful of a reaction, they would depend on getting feedback from others and then they would just write that down. So they didn't actually have a direct insight into the person. They didn't have any relationship with the person, but they were just simply sharing information. And when they received, when that information was received, it came off just as that. Like the person giving me feedback doesn't actually have any type of relation with me, hasn't seen any growth, could not actually speak and give me feedback if I ask them directly because this is a process, this is their system. Then I've seen others who have just been so honest with their feedback. Actually, one of my favorite leaders of all time, who I still keep in contact with, was someone that gave me a very honest perspective of an interview that I had with her. And I had, had been working for a long time and no one had ever shared with me. She said, "Your resume is amazing, but how you show up in person, I wouldn't hire you. And this
Wow.
is why." And this is, but I asked for it, like I wanted it. I wanted that, and she knew I was open to it. So I really think, and she was very direct with it too. I've noticed some people who give me very direct feedback, and it was very uncomfortable. Um, I wasn't sure if it was true, if it was just their perception, but it was direct. So I think it's also using that discernment, especially as children of God, in this space, not only just the kingdom space, but in our careers, is using that discernment to know your audience, to know how they're going to receive it, or knowing what is the best thing to share, or the timing. Is this the right time for that? I know this is our annual time for evaluation, but would this person feel less blindsided if I had actually set up a goal or some expectations to reach, so that when we got to the evaluation process, they wouldn't feel completely blindsided by what you were mentioning or saying?
Right. I
I've
think there.
also found, in my own experience, personally giving feedback and also receiving it, is that we're not always clear with our expectations.
Hmm.
So when the evaluation comes, people are not quite sure what to do with it because we did not set up clear enough goals and expectations in the beginning. So they didn't actually work towards what we were hoping they would. They worked towards something, but it wasn't what we wanted them to.
That's excellent. I like the different scenarios that you give in work environment as believers, and then even from a personal perspective, that relationship, that sometimes the nature of our relationship is what will impact how we would receive the feedback. But I do find sometimes, particularly in Christendom, that even as it relates to having a rapport with people, and we say we're brothers and sisters in the Lord, and so there's that foundation of a relationship. But then if it's absent, it can be absence of a personal dynamic where we're not actually spending time with a person outside of when we see them in ministry, church activities. And we try to give correction, or we try to give some type of feedback, like the example you gave with the leader that you kept in contact with, where she took the time to share pertinent information for you that was going to benefit you. It could have been uncomfortable, but you recognized the benefit of what was being shared and realized that there was value in it. I think sometimes in ministry settings, when people, and I brought up correction, but not even from a correction standpoint, but even things that relate to how a person interacts, how they come across, the dynamic of their tone of voice or how they express themselves, that sometimes people will try to share that you're coming across maybe not in a positive way, but because that person might be in leadership, maybe not even in leadership, that we tend to, it's not only uncomfortable, but we tend to reject that type of truthful information.
Yes. And I would say it goes back to, especially in the kingdom space, we are we are rejecting knowledge. We are rejecting learning. And Proverbs 12:1 tells us that if we have a love of learning, we have a love of knowledge, and those who despise correction or instruction are considered foolish. And we have to get it to the place, which I can even say myself, I am learning to love correction because there's so much that comes from it. But it also has to stem with to our relationship with God. When that vertical relationship is tight and we are learning, we are in that intention of learning every day and aware of what we're putting on every day, so far as the mind of Christ, so far as how we are reacting, interacting with others, it begins to get easier in how we receive that from each other. But that discernment, I can't stress that more, but that discernment is key in the kingdom of God. We cannot operate like we would everywhere else because we are dealing with spiritual things, and a lot of times that information not getting from one person to another can cause something that could be avoided if we had just to spiritually discern that situation and say, you know what, this person is in a fragile state of mind, or you know what, I'm seeing this person feels rejected every time I say this, even though that's not my intent. Types of things like that, that the Spirit will show us about a person or show us about a situation, or even most importantly, show us about ourselves. I'm giving this feedback to someone, but the way I'm doing it, where's that coming from? Why am I choosing it to do it this way? And I think a lot of our relationship, or that relationship management, it stems from what's coming out of us at any particular moment. Why am I going about this the way I am? Is this a trigger for me? Is this something to make me feel in control of the situation? Am I actually helping them? Or am I doing it because there's a benefit in it for me? So I think a lot of it comes back to really examining ourselves, especially as Christians, especially as believers. How am I representing Christ, even in this interaction, even in this time of feedback? Am I being honest? And as one of my leaders says, are you being honorable in this situation? Are you being someone of integrity in this situation? So I think all of those are just really important things to consider. But most importantly, how am I coming across in my relationships? And when I do receive correction, is this someone that is coming out of love, even if I don't know them? What if it's a stranger, an angel unaware? Am I able to receive it because the Holy Spirit is trying to get my attention and say, I love you so much that I'm trying to get your attention so you can change this, so that people can continue to see me and not see you?
One of the things that I think is so powerful as believers is that feedback, insight, truth doesn't always come in a church setting. Doesn't always come through a preach message or through worship. We do have the word, and those are avenues, but that God uses people. And that's why it's so important when we talk about managing relationships, because being aware and that discernment that you talk about of how God uses people to bring truth and growth and development in each of us. And I think some of the greatest opportunities that I've had to grow came from people who I didn't actually have a relationship with. And they shared insights, and I've shared this on prior episodes, the fact they shared insights that were so beneficial to me, not just from a corporate perspective, but even personally, and how I come across and how I interact with people. I think when we look at relationship management, that you're right on when you say that it starts with our self. And I think when we look at the components of emotional intelligence, it starts with self awareness, and then being aware of oneself. How do we manage ourself? because those two parts absolutely impact our relationships. Because if we're not aware of how we're coming across, aware of things that we're struggling with, things that we might even have within us that need healing, then as we interact with people and try to build relationships or maintain relationships, we can have a pattern or cycle of conflict, of brokenness, and not conflict that comes from feedback, but just conflict that comes from because things that we haven't dealt with internally.
Yes.
Someone telling the truth to us doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us. And I think you said it earlier, we personalize it. If we could separate ourselves, that they're not trying to point the finger at us, our value, or our identity, and only just raising characteristics, traits, or things, behavior patterns that we need to address, I think maybe we could respond differently.
Yes, I love that you said that too, because it reminds me as well that even in our discussion today, I am approaching you with the truth of my experiences. But they may not necessarily, and you might ask me a question that reminds me or that conflicts or is different than that truth. But guess what? It's God's word, it's God's truth. So now I'm challenged within myself to look at my experiences and say, you know what? I've experienced these things and I thought everything was like this, but that's not true because the word is leading me differently. And now I'm seeing what through Dr. Evonne's question or her feedback or engaging in a relationship with you, whether it be a friendship or other, I'm seeing it differently now. And I think it takes courage for us to step beyond the truths that we have known because it shakes up our world. It shakes up everything that we know. And although we say we love change, a lot of times when we're approached with change, when it's right in front of us, that's
Right.
when we really get to see how we feel about it, how we respond. You can't hide that response from anyone. And especially those who get to know you and those who are around you, they get to see how you deal with change. And so they get to see too if how we see ourselves is really what's really showing up in those moments that we're being challenged to look at something differently.
I'm extremely passionate about the principle of truth. There's two scriptures that I always have a part of me in my thoughts when dealing with situations. One, you should know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. A lot of times people misquote it and they say the truth will set you free, but it says it will make you free, that it makes us, it allows us to be free when we know the truth. And then the
Yes.
other scripture that I'm always saying to myself when I'm dealing with people is that iron sharpens iron, and so does the countenance of a friend. And that with that, when we're in relationship with people, a lot of times people think a healthy relationship is tied to one that is happy go lucky all the time, always having fun and always positive. But I believe that a healthy relationship can include conflict. And not the conflict that we were talking about earlier, but that tension that comes at times in relationships with disagreements, things that you might not see eye to eye on, even our past experience, how we approach and our perspective on different situations and circumstances that we're dealing with. If we're both going through something, or let's say we're on a team, and our approach to something or how we see that situation or circumstance could be different, which brings a tension. That tension does not have to be negative. The tension is because we both have different experiences and backgrounds of how we see and approach that circumstance. But where truth comes in, and that relationship not going over the line of being toxic or unhealthy, is where we're able to talk through and communicate our differences, communicate our perspectives, so that we could come to a common understanding or alignment about what it is that we have on tasked with us to do, or if it's just even a relationship, just trying to understand one another.
Yes, I believe when you were talking about the healthy and the toxic relationships, I really, it reminds me of reading a book talking about safe people and having safe conversations. What is safe to you may not be safe to someone else. And what I have learned too is that when you can be yourself, all of yourself, flaws and
Right.
all, that is a relationship that you are finding yourself going towards, and continuing to invest in it every single day, because every type of relationship, even the toxic ones, take work. And so
Yeah.
the question is, do I want to waste my time on this toxic relationship, or do I want to invest time in this healthy relationship that is good for me, that is making me uncomfortable, that is challenging me, but I know that I'll be better in the end. And I also believe too that it's not one sided. Both sides are growing, both sides are being challenged. um, I, I used to laugh growing up when people would say, I'm one, I usually have something to do, and they maybe wanted some more of my time. And as I've gotten older, I've become more comfortable with saying, hey, I'm not someone who will probably talk to you every day, type of a thing, just to understand what the boundaries of the relationships were. But I also found that the same people who would pull on your time in a season where they were not busy, as soon as they became busy, they understood, and things began to flow differently in the relationship. So sometimes it just has to do with the seasons that we're in at the moment. I need a little bit more of your time right now. When I get back on my feet, we're good to go again, type of a thing, and talking it out. And I also think it's also important to know people. The Bible talks about to know that those that labor among you, especially talking about in the kingdom setting, in all different types of ministry and different types of assignments that we have. But it's not just a matter of knowing of a person. I don't know how many times in my career and even in my personal relationships, people would say to me, Elizabeth, I know I was just checking to see how you're doing. I heard you weren't feeling well, but you look like you're put together. So I knew that you were doing well. And I said, and that's because you know of me, but you don't know me
Right.
personally. I will always strive to put myself together, whether I feel good or not. But that was something that was taught to me growing up. But the only way you would know that is the more we talk, the more we get to know each other in relationship. And so, and the question that I would usually ask people who ask me that is that something that I can know of you? When I see you're not put together, I know you're not feeling well. Yes. So how many times in our relationship, no matter what type of relationship, we like to talk to people and deal with them as we would do. And most of the times it's not that. We literally have to learn people and why they do what they do, and the different nuances that make them different and make them unique.
I like when you say about getting to know people, talking to people, because we're talking about relationship management. That a person being safe, we can't even know about the safety of a person unless we actually really know them. I think sometimes that boundary or that line of safety we tie to our negative experiences. So we don't give people the benefit of the doubt when we're in a relationship with them. If they make a mistake, if they misspeak, about in the heat of a conversation, it's like we're still human. We're still human. We still make errors. We still don't always say the right things. And even in this cancel culture that we're living in, that and I'm not talking about things from a moral perspective, but the fact that we will give up on people or cut people off when people say things that we don't like or we don't agree with. And sometimes it's just a matter of a lack of understanding, a lack of knowing, even culturally, understanding people's backgrounds, different cultures, ethnicities, of how people respond, interpret, and approach different situations. That is just a matter of being familiar or being more aware of that other person, their culture, their ethnicity. One thing that you were talking about that I'd like to speak more about is just the nature of healthy relationships. And I'm just such a strong advocate for speaking truth in relationships. The relationship can be family, it can be kingdom related, it can be work related, but there just tends to be this propensity where we don't speak the truth. We would rather remove ourselves from the relationship, remove ourselves from the setting instead of dealing with those issues. Now, some of the people, it may not necessarily be something that where we want to stay. Like if we work in a job and it's really not aligned with our career interests or even our long-term goals, like that's a quick fix where you might look for a job elsewhere. But when I think about kingdom relationships and even like family relationships or even friendships, like I know people when they don't agree with something or if someone says something that they don't like, that they will just get mad and like not deal with that person anymore. And I forget what the saying is, like they're doing me or like I don't I forget, it's a saying, I can't remember it right now, where they just, but in essence they just move on. But how can we encourage one another in kingdom environments, even family? How can we encourage each other or even individually to initiate change, to start speaking truth, not to tear people down, not to point the finger, not in a punitive way, but just to be more honest, knowing the word says you should know the truth and the truth shall make you free, and that iron sharpens iron. So does the countenance. So does the health of a friend, the safety of a friend, the honor of a friend. How do we initiate this change?
I think Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, lean not to your own understanding, but in all thy ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. I think that's so, so important, especially in the kingdom setting, because we cannot afford to depend on us. If we could do it on our own, which some of us have been doing it for a long time on our own, we would, and we would be successful. But when we look around and if we can remember that every person in relationship with God is made in the image of God, just like us. So there is actually no respecter of person. There is no difference in the eyes of the Lord. But the fact that I and someone else can say, you're not worthy of me getting this right. You are not worthy of me seeking truth in this place. That's actually a slight towards God and to his instruction to us, because we're leaning to our own understanding. We're leaning, hoping that we can figure it out when the Bible is clearly telling us, I need you to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I know about your thoughts. I know they're not yours. I'm giving you this word because I know you need it. And in case you forgot, I have given you a supply of grace and mercy every morning because I need you to grow. I need you to change, right? So he's always requiring something of us. And every day, I was teaching a Bible study not too long ago on, what are you wearing? What is it every day that you intentionally put on? We put on our clothes, we put on our accessories, glasses, whatever else may be. But on the inside, what am I intending to wear today? Who am I identifying with today? I have that choice every single day of my life. And I know who I have decided to identify with when I have that conversation with that person and I walk away without it being resolved. And I know in my heart I didn't tell the truth. I know in my heart that I was not honest with them. And I know that there's going to have to be another meeting, or I'm going to walk away with a heaviness in my heart, or they're walking away feeling some kind of way because we didn't deal with it honestly and in a truthful place. So I think just that constant recognition that I cannot lean to my own understanding on this. I have tried this and it didn't work. But Lord, I'm going to try it your way because I want to get your result. I want to see this person made whole. I want to be whole. And I want to enjoy everything that this person brings to my life and vice versa. I think us deciding to be the example of someone who speaks truth is the first step. A lot of times we look for the other person to do it, but it constantly falls back into our lap that I have to change what I'm doing. And as I change, I will see changes in my relationships. I'll give you a perfect example. Just real simple. Talking to a friend who I've known for years. And for whatever reason, she just had never felt comfortable to share this with me. She said, Liz, sometimes the words you use are big, and I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, really? I had no idea. You just seem like you're just always enjoying our conversations. She said, I have to Google stuff because I don't know what to talk about. She said, you're just always so excited when we talk. And I appreciated that because I had no idea that that's what she was experiencing in just our private conversations. I said, well, how can I help? How can I change it? I don't want to assume anything, but how can I do it differently? She said, if you say the word, say what it means. And so now that's just a habit I've gotten into wherever I'm at. If I use a word, a lot of times I'll just break it down. Or I'll say, stop me and say, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. But a simple change like that changed our relationship to where she is enjoying the conversation now in its entirety and not just parts. And as long as I had known of her, I didn't know that part. So that give and take is so, so important that we speak up if it's something that we need in that relationship or something that we don't understand. And if the response is it's not something the other person is willing to do, then we go from there. But at least we are being honest in the moment and saying, hey, let's try it this way, or hey, I didn't understand this, or hey, was that really the Spirit of the Lord speaking to you? Or do you think that was just something that you personally wanted to do? All those things are like checks and balances that the Lord is showing us in His Word that He's provided for us to be successful even in our relationships.
Yeah, as we wind down, what are your thoughts of how we can receive truth in different ways? Because I feel like you are accustomed to dealing with direct people. I'm very direct, and I've come across people like for people to be direct. It turns them off. It makes them feel some kind of way. But when I look at, I feel like people should say what they mean. All these flowery words, or most often I don't know what you mean. Can you please clarify? Interpreting or misunderstanding what's being said because the person was not direct. Now, I don't intend to be direct from the perspective of trying to hurt or harm someone. It's just, and most often it's just being clear or just getting to the point, or it's just my communication style. How can we not be, especially as believers? I think we need to give grace and other things that you shared about, but talk about how we can receive the truth without personalizing it, without feeling that it's being punitive, and that we would just move forward and recognize it as a healthy trait and something that is beneficial to us.
I would say it would be very important, like I mentioned, what I mentioned before, is to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So I realized, now that I realized in myself that I personalize things, and I separate the truth of it to mean something else. Now I need to go to the Lord and say, Lord, help me deal with this because I am surrounded by great people, or I'm surrounded by, I'm actually, this person is an answer to my prayer.
Mm.
And really seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, show me where I'm off in my personal filter, that the very thing I asked for, I'm now rejecting
Mm.
because it's not coming across how I wanted it to or how I would like it to sound. What is it in me that when this person says this, that it triggers this? What is it in me that makes me want to reject that when I actually know this to be truth? What is it that I'm feeling? Help me with what I'm feeling. Um, and also being reminded of 2 Corinthians 3 when it talks about we're living epistles read of men in our hearts. So our hearts give us away all the time. And so it's asking God, Lord, help me to guard my heart. Help my heart to be clean and ready to receive what I need to hear, that will make me not only better, but that is a representation of you. You said you would lead and guide through all truth, going back to what you said earlier, Dr. Evonne, that the Lord uses people many times to show us His word in different ways, to allow us to feel His presence and to experience that He's near and close. But if I'm constantly rejecting that, I am missing the very voice of God. And it also goes back to how I see people. If I cannot see you as someone who's also made in the image and the likeness of God, who can be used at any time, then I can't receive from you because I'm looking at you in a different way. So again, it has to do with my personal filter, how I'm my perspective on things, how I'm seeing things, how I'm seeing those around me, um, and also the things that are within me, like you said, that I haven't dealt with, that are blocking new knowledge and information from getting in there. There is something blocking. Once again, it's a condition of the heart. And it reminds me how many times we hear people say, "Don't judge me, you can't judge me." The Bible is telling us in so many different scriptures in his word, if we'll just read it. I mean, the only way you're gonna find it is if you actually read it. But it's
Open it
in
up.
there. I mean, when we say living epistles, that means people are reading our chapters.
Right.
Before we write the book, people are reading us every single day. And our actions and our beliefs, how we approach things, how we respond to things. And then when later we say, "Well, they were judging me," they were reading what you were putting out there because it couldn't be hid, especially when you're a light that the Spirit of the Lord is working within. We are set high. Those lights are shining so people can see and they're taking notice, you know? So it goes back to, again, being transformed by the renewing of our mind. If we say or we claim to know God, First John talks about, and we don't follow his commands, he calls us a liar, and the truth is not in us. And that's another thing then I have to deal with. Oh my goodness, the truth is not in me right now. I am refusing not only what I'm hearing from the Lord to do in the situation, but I'm also refusing and rejecting his messenger. That's a hard truth, but it'll save us.
I would ask someone to pass the offering plate right now because you preaching. The other side of that too is what you share is so powerful, but there's responsibility on both parties for even the person, like for my example myself, being more direct, recognizing that it's not always welcome. I try to find ways to soften how I say things, not changing what I say, but how I say it. If I need to, and not being pretentious or insincere, but just being conscious of sometimes speaking the truth the way that it can be received to just make sure I'm overly sensitive in how I'm sharing it. Uh,
Yes.
Go ahead and share about your book and your services that you'd like for people to know and how they can reach out to you.
Sure, I had the distinct honor of being part of a book project called the Businesswoman's Bible Study that is available on Amazon, and that came out last year. I wrote with 10 other women um, Bible studies related to things that would help, inspire, and encourage women. So check that out. And I am also currently working on a workbook that is corresponds to my chapter that I wrote in that book, and that will be available in September on Amazon as well. And you can search my last name. The title of my chapter was "Growing with Grace." And so far as my business, what I do, I am a consultant for faith-based businesses, helping them to develop their communities. The name of the network that I have created is called Fueled by Faith Enterprises. And if you have any questions or are interested in my services, please reach out to me by email, and that is eleffall@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me.